I was 28 when I started cocaine, and it's funny how it began. I was working in a New York City health club, and I met a beautiful woman, and for 2 months we flirted together, and we did a very dumb thing, and our way of finally getting together was to say, hey, let's buy a gram and sit down. Unfortunately, we bought a gram every day, and for 5 weeks, after 5 weeks, it burned out, and all the natural attractions that we had just went up in coke.
I started dabbling in heroin, I guess, pretty much, 1982, 1983, but I didn't really start using fully till about 1986, when I was about 20 years old. And from 1986 to about 1990, I guess, those are the years that I got addicted to heroin. And it started off slow. I started off just with, say, one bag, 1 bag a day to 1 bag a week to 2 bags a week till, you just build it up slowly. And I guess by 1988, when I was 22, I really reached my first level of addiction.
I was addicted to street methadone. I was a weekend user, what they call a weekend warrior. I worked and went to school, but then I used on the weekends. And then, of course, that progressed. And before, actually, my last run, which everybody knows what a bad run is, I did a 4-year run of cocaine and heroin mixture IV use. It's called speedballing, for a good 4 years. How it affected my life, I went from having everything to having absolutely nothing.
I went into a continuous use of cocaine after the first time of trying it. I liked it and had a continuous love affair with it from the time I was about 17 years old till present, 38 years old. The actual history of my abuse would probably stop at cocaine. Cocaine was a drug of my choice. Cocaine was the drug that I went after. Cocaine was the drug that I chased. Not that I haven't tried any other drugs. I think I've tried every drug imaginable to mankind, including Cabona cleaning fluid.
From pilot to pills, like Valiums and Tylenols, and then I did acid. And most of my teens was basically alcohol, acid. And I did a lot of psychedelics like peyote, DPT, DMT, MDA, ecstasy, stuff like that. I was very into psychedelics. And in my 20s, about 24, I started doing cocaine. And then basically I started getting very into cocaine and freebasing. And then, when you freebase, you have to come down. So then I started doing heroin to come down, and then eventually switched from cocaine to heroin. And it was basically, up to right now, it was basically heroin and cocaine.
That time early on, I was just sniffing. What I found was my nose was burning a lot. And I had a friend, I call him. He came up and he brought this cooker and pipe and things, and he said, try this. And at first, it didn't affect me. The third time, it affected me, and affected me. And I kept going and going and going. Unfortunately, also at that time, around that time, my mother passed away, and I had about $7,000 from her insurance policy, and I was driving a cab still at the time, and I owed back taxes. So out of the 7, I paid off like $2,800, and the rest of it, I used to write checks to my best friend, cash, a lot, and it went on and on and on. At one point, I was able to stop on my own for a short time, but with every relationship, it seemed my cocaine use, my freebasing got in the way of any healthy relationship. But somehow I didn't care. And I did care, but I was not in control.
I kind of look at my drug abuse as like a fishbowl. It's like I was always trying to look in, like I was always outside looking in. I was always I wasn't very into cliques. I was always on the outside. I always had trouble. Like, I was very bad at sports, and everyone was good at sports. You know, everyone was in the neighborhood I grew up in. I was a Jewish kid in an Italian neighborhood. I was always seen to be the odd man out, you know. Everyone was into fighting, I wasn't, you know. It was kind of like, and I think that led to my life. I never felt like I was, you know, part of the group or part of things. And I think drugs made me feel like I didn't matter, or I could escape from that.
Well, I think heroin, well, you know, it's not any one, to be honest. It's really easy to say that I just used it to suppress all my emotions, or I didn't feel good about myself. But I mean, there's lots of different reasons for it. One reason is the obvious reason, is that it's a very, very enjoyable kick, you know. And on a deeper psychological level, it does suppress my emotions. It did suppress my emotions.
I started using drugs when I was 12 years old. I started drinking alcohol. At that time, it was the in thing to do. I progressed to marijuana and then onto cocaine and heroin. Actually, it was acid at that time. And at that time, it was a peer pressure thing. But the reason I continued, I don't think it was so much peer pressure as I do come from a dysfunctional family, if we want to get into it. I mean, that's number one. And number two, I was a very hyperactive child, and drugs made me feel normal.
I had pretty much a screwed up youth. When I was 2, I had a big car accident. I was in hospital for a long time. It had an after effect of 6 years in and out of hospitals. So I'd say that's like a traumatic experience that always sort of like bothered me, because I had like a different upbringing than a lot of the kids around me. And then when I grew up in Amsterdam, and I moved to this small town with my family. And this small town was really horrible. It was the opposite of my upbringing, the 10 years in Amsterdam that were really free. That little village was really Christian and moralistic, and I didn't feel at home there, and I didn't have any friends for like 3 years. I'd say from 12 to 15, I was completely without friends. And that was a really depressing period, because I was also getting into puberty and all that, and it really felt horrible. And by the time I finally got a friend, also the high school I was in was horrible. It was Christian, and I wasn't brought up with any religion, and it was just really a horrible school to be in. And by the time I finally had a friend, when I was 16, I started totally freaking out, and I just changed completely from A to B. I can't explain it, but from black to white. I changed from being somebody who's trying to adapt to somebody who said, fuck it, I'm just going to freak out. And a couple of years later, I started doing heroin.
The problem with me with detoxing is I've always had an enormous fear of detoxing. It's painful. I suffer from high blood pressure and hypertension. So therefore, when I would detox, I would stay in the hospital long enough to be detoxed, but the minute I got out, I would get high.